the spot right there, buddy. Hey everyone, I am on the way to Lake Norman. It is February 18th. It is 9 o'clock at night and it's pouring rain. And we're going to fish the Major League Fishing event this weekend on Lake Norman, and I am pumped up. You know, the first BFL of the year for 2021, and I'm excited to fish. It's going to be tough conditions. It's cold. I haven't had time to practice. I actually moved houses this last week. I packed everything up and moved into a new place. I've got boxes all over the house, but I've got my boat and I've got my fishing rods, fishing reels, and I've got some tackle, and I'm going to do this thing. My buddy is waiting for me. I said it's will be 1 o'clock in the morning before I get up to Norman, and I'll be out early in the morning, and we'll see what practice brings. So, hey, we're ready to go. We're on the road. We'll see what happens.
Man, it's awful warm out here this morning, Sergeant Major.
You like it, don't you?
Yeah, this is nice. This is your type of weather right here, isn't it?
I thought about it last night. Got about one I had to piss. I got pissed in your boat seat, so it's really nice and frozen.
Nice and frozen over for me. That's awful nice of you. Yeah, I hear you. I tell you, we couldn't ask for better weather. I might put some shorts on later tonight. I don't know. $500 and follow me around. Whew. Man, it is cold this morning. Cold this morning.
Good morning, everyone. I made it in last night, probably about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I am here at Lake Norman. I'm ready to launch and ready to see what practice brings. Looks like it's a little muddy out there, and it's cold, but hey, we're fishing. So let's see what happens. Practice starts now.
So I started out the first morning of practice above the 150 bridge. The water was surprisingly muddy, although I should have realized how muddy it was going to be based on all the rain we had had that week and the cold weather. I mean, there was debris everywhere, but I thought, well, maybe I can get on something in the stained water. I feel like at Norman you can always fish the clear water and catch some fish, although that really didn't prove to be true. But this is where I started, and I started throwing, crankbaits and spinnerbaits and things like that, because I really thought that if a guy could get on a good largemouth bite up the river, he would have a nice bag of fish. And it just turned into more and more muddy water. And I mean, I fished rock, I fished wood, I threw a lot of different baits. it just wasn't happening up there. And finally, I kind of determined that, the longer I stayed up here, the more practice I was wasting. And, the funny thing is I didn't hardly see any boats up here, right? And typically that's the first indicator, right? I mean, 193 boats in this tournament, and I'm fishing up the river, and I think I might have saw 5 or 6 guys. Now, of course, this was Friday. I think a lot of guys showed up and practiced on Saturday, but I saw very few indicators that anybody really was going to fish up the river. But I wanted to try it. I had to get it out of my mind, and that's where I started at. I fished docks as well, as you can see here. I'm coming up on a few docks and throwing a lot of crankbaits, really. I did throw some spinnerbaits the first morning of practice, but the water temperature was really cold, but it wasn't, super, super cold. I did have some ice on my guides that morning when I first started, but I really thought that I could fish a crankbait and get a few bites. That's a pattern that you typically can rely on in eastern North Carolina: muddy, stained water, crankbait, spinnerbait bite. And I thought, hey, this is going to work. Even if I can only get 4 to 5 bites a day, I thought, if one of them is a 4-pounder and the other one is a 3 or a 2.5, and then I just have some keepers mixed in, I'll have a pretty good bag, because I knew it's going to be a super tough tournament. But, when you fish all day for hours and hours and hours, and you can't get a bite at all, you start to realize that, hey, this isn't going to happen.
Put your rods up before I see what you're throwing. You better hurry up and put them up.
I encourage you to put my shit. Matter of fact, I'll show it to you. Throw it on Sunday. I threw everything that I fucking got through. I just threw fucking round traps on.
I threw a bunch of shit too. I didn't get a bite.
What's that?
I threw a bunch of shit too. I didn't get a bite.
Hey, so it's the end of practice day 1. Did not catch a fish today. Water was really cold. Water temperatures, I saw them as low as 38. Threw a lot of crankbaits, threw some spinner baits, worked some swim baits, and drug some shaky heads. I did a little bit of everything today. Didn't catch a fish at all. Didn't even get a bite. My partner, he didn't get a bite either. It's been really tough. So I'm going to make a big move tomorrow, go to the other end of the lake and see what happens. So hope everybody's having a good Friday, and we'll see what happens tomorrow out here. Hey, so here we are, day 2 out here on Lake Norman. Yesterday was really rough, and let's see what day 2 brings. I mean, I'm going to try some different baits, different areas. It's actually colder today, and there's no wind, so the conditions are worse. There's a lot of tournament boats out here, but let's see what happens. Day 2 starts now.
So day 2 of practice, I launched at the Betty Ford access area, and I ran down the lake. And as you can see, still, ran into sustained water down there. I mean, I know there was a couple small areas that had fairly clear water in the lake, but I felt like really most of the lake was stained, especially for Norman. It was probably the worst. Well, it was the worst I had ever seen. And I ran down to the Davison Creek area, and I believe is the Reeds Creek area. At least that's what shows on my Navionics chip. And the water was warmer down there. I found some water temps in the 50s, high 50 degree range, and just still really struggled. And I'm not sure what the deal is on Lake Norman, I've always heard about these hot ditches and how the water discharge, you can catch them in the winter and all that stuff, but I've never really found that to be true. In fact, I've really found that when I get in that warmer water in the winter, it's almost like the fishing gets worse, or you catch a bunch of little teeny fish that doesn't, do you any good. The only thing I can think of is maybe it's pressure. Maybe there's so many people fishing down in those areas where that warmer water is, that the fish get really line shy and lure shy down there, and you just end up catching a bunch of small fish or nothing at all. But at this point, second day of practice, I really didn't have a choice. I had to change up, and so that's what I did. You can see the water's a little clear here. I think this is in the Reeds Creek area. Still got some stain to it. I mean, typically this area here is gin clear, and I started fishing docks, and has always been my mainstay at Lake Norman. And I slowed down a little bit and tried to pick some docks apart, but still just didn't have any success. And I talked to a few guys out in the water, and of course fishermen are notorious for telling you everything but the truth. But the guys that I talked to seemed to all be struggling. I talked to several guys that day that hadn't caught a fish either in a day and a half, and it became apparent to me that there was no secret sauce or secret recipe for this tournament. It was going to be a grind. You were going to be lucky to get a few bites. If you got 5 or 6 bites, it was going to be a super day, and a limit, even though a small limit, would go a long ways. That being said, I knew that there was a lot of boats in this tournament. I mean, we had close to a 200 boat field, and anytime you put 200 guys on the water, there's going to be a quarter of them or a third of them that catch fish. And then the weights are going to quickly drop off down to either a bunch of zeros or, 1 or 2 fish. So that's, at this point, I had my mind kind of prepared for this grind, and the tournament day was actually going to be colder than any day we had in practice so far. That's what they were predicting, which I knew was going to shut down the fish even harder. But at this point, I was committed. I'd put a lot of time into this tournament, and I certainly wasn't going to back out. I mean, I was going to fish. And a lot of times these tournaments that are really grinders, guys that aren't locals like me have an opportunity, because the fish that typically, bite for the locals, they're not biting for them either. So it makes it hard on everybody. So I thought, well, maybe, I can get 4 or 5 decent bites, and I'll be right where I need to be. At this point, I think it's, I want to say it's about 11 or 12 o'clock on the second day of practice, and, I'm thinking to myself, what am I going to do? I've tried everything. I really didn't have any answers. I started pulling into various creeks and running them and fishing a lot of docks. And, I had my hooks cut off, my hooks bent over. And, my plan was if I got 1 bite, hey, I'm marking it and I'm moving on. But sometimes you just need a bite, and you hear a lot of these pros talk about it. Hey, I just need a bite, or a couple of bites, and that will really clue me in on what I need to do. And for those that don't fish a lot, it's probably hard for them to understand. Like, what do you mean you just need to catch 1 or 2 fish? Well, a lot of times those 1 or 2 bites will give you an idea. Hey, are they shallow? Are they deep? Or they'll bite a crankbait, or they'll bite a soft plastic, or they'll bite a jig. But when you're fishing in a tournament like this and you've had nothing and you've tried everything, it makes it super tough. And you can see here I moved into some marinas later in the day. I got my jig out. I started fishing real slow. I found some rock walls in these marinas that had some fairly deep water access, 20, 25 feet deep. And I just started dragging a jig really, really slow. And still had no success. I used my Garmin a little bit in these deep marinas, and I did see some fish. I saw some suspended fish, but I could not get them to do anything. And of course, I really don't know if they were bass. The Garmin unit I bought this year is a fairly new thing to me, but I will tell you, the guys that are thinking about maybe buying some type of live scope, or I think Panoptics It is impressive. I mean, you can absolutely see fish swimming around. It's really clear underwater, and I don't regret buying the unit at all. It's not the end-all be-all, but I haven't had a lot of time with it either. I feel like maybe if I spent 6 or 7, 8 hours out there messing with it a few days in a row, I would get a better feel for it. But it is an impressive unit. It's really clear, far better than anything I've had before. You know, same thing that Lowrance trolling motor I bought, the Ghost trolling motor. I'm not sponsored by any of these guys, but if any of y'all are looking to buy a new trolling motor, I can't say anything bad about the Lowrance Ghost. The other ones could be better or just as good. I don't know, but I'm very satisfied with the Garmin unit and the Lowrance I bought.
All right, so just finished up practice, 2 days worth on the water, and have not caught a fish yet. Me and my partner, neither one of us. It's been really tough on us. Really don't know what I'm gonna do for the tournament tomorrow. Probably opposite of what I've done the last 2 days. I'm gonna try some new areas and hope it works out. The water's really cold and the conditions are brutal. But some of these guys are gonna catch them, you know, there's no doubt about it, and hopefully it'll be me. So that's it. Practice is a wrap, and tournament's tomorrow. See ya. Y'all take care. Out here.
I'll get you a little coffee this morning, are you?
Yeah.
I don't drink coffee. I don't drink coffee.
I tell you, I was really happy to launch this morning. You can see it was 22 degrees out. It was super cold. We had to get there really early because the ramp was going to be a mess, you know, 193 boats. But something about sitting around in the cold, kind of doing nothing and waiting makes it just super bad. You know, my fingers were about frozen. My feet were cold. I actually took some Hot Pockets and put them in my hands, which helps some get the blood flowing. But I was ready to launch, and where was I going? So I was going down lake. You know, I wasn't going to go up the river and mess with that brown orange water. I will tell you, I sat and watched pretty much everyone launch, and I want to say there was maybe 9 to 10 boats that went up in that water. I didn't do it. I went down the lake towards the Betty Ford access, and I actually made the decision to stop on a point that I had caught fish off of before, not in practice, but a place that I had, you know, I've caught a few on Lake Norman over the years, and I thought, well, I didn't hit it in practice, so let's try something different. Maybe this will work out before the sun gets up too high. Let me throw a moving bait and, you know, kind of slow roll a spinner bait and see if it'll work out. I probably stayed here no more than 15 or 20 minutes, honestly. You know, I don't know how many casts I made, but it wasn't a whole lot. You know, just throwing a willow leaf spinner bait, you know, kind of a shad imitation bait, and just easing around these rocks, a little bit deeper water up against this bank right here. You know, it's not a secret spot or anything. You can look on the map and pretty much see these rocky points that I stopped at, but it didn't work out, and I quickly moved on to the next spot.
Feels good on your back, doesn't it?
So, as you can see, I started off in a marina down the lake. I'm sure if you pay attention enough, you can figure out where it's at. It's no big secret, but I'm not going to tell you. You're going to have to look it up if you want to know. And I started fishing a jig, and I was fishing really slow. This place had some, you know, a little bit deeper water with some rock around it. A lot of these marinas do on Lake Norman, and I thought, well, maybe I can, you know, get a bite or two in here. So what drew me to this area? I think it was the deep water, and you know, it had been protected a little bit back in this marina, and I knew I could fish a jig. And frankly, I was really surprised that I didn't find anybody else in here. when I started. And I just took my time and fished really slow. What was I throwing? I'll show you at the end of the video. It was nothing special. It was kind of a brownish jig. I think maybe it was a 1/2 ounce or 3/8 ounce, but it was just, I'd throw it out, I'd let it sink, and I'd fish it really slow, and I'd kind of drag it back to the boat. And my co-angler, I believe he was throwing a shaky head behind me, and the name of the game was to slow down. We had ice in our rod guides. You can see right there, I thought I might have had a bite, but I don't think I did. Looking back on it, it was just a little bit of a hang. And this cold water, when fish bite, you guys know, sometimes it's really hard to tell you've got a bite, because you're just barely moving that jig, and then it stops. And sometimes it's stopped because it's up against something on the bottom. You can see I threw back in there, and I thought, well, maybe I got another bite, but it just didn't happen for me. So this little spot here, I wanted to show you guys because I thought it had some potential. You can see the floating dock, and up underneath that walkway there's some rock. And it's pretty steep, and it slopes down, and it goes to some really deep water. And I saw it in practice, and I thought, man, it's just a matter of time for this bass along this wall right here. And so I kind of went around the back side of the marina. I worked this area really slow with a jig. Put it in a few cracks and crevices, which a lot of times is a key to jig fishing, putting that jig somewhere where a lot of guys don't. And, just took my time, fished it really slow, and again, no luck. It just did not work out, and I very quickly had to move on and kind of put this marina and this, dragging this jig around behind me. So where did I go? At this point, it's probably 10 o'clock in the morning, and I've got no fish and not catching anything in practice. So I thought, well, let me go try to catch some retreads. And for those that don't know what that is, those are basically fish that have been released in an area, most times from another tournament. I knew they had a big tournament the day before, which is another reason why I think the fishing was also so tough. It was a really big tournament. So I ran down to Blythe Landing. Again, no secret. They had a big tournament go out of there Saturday. Nothing against the rules doing this. And I headed down there, and I got a spinning rod out. And I just took my time, and I fished all around Blythe Landing. And, I fished the docks and the rocks around there. And there's a couple little points that come out. And hoping, surely there had to have been hundreds of fish released there, just the day before. Maybe I could get a couple to bite. And again, it didn't work out for me. I didn't get a bite at Blythe Landing. We stayed there at about 12 o'clock, and then I had to put that behind me and move on to the next spot. So what is the next spot? The next spot was down by the dam. I had caught fish here in the past. I did not fish in practice, although my travel partner said he came up and practiced, around here some and fished it and didn't have any luck. I thought, well, I don't know exactly what areas he tried. So I pulled into a rocky bank that I knew had some sun on it that morning, and I thought, well, maybe I'd catch some. And, I fished it fairly slow. I got a crankbait out, and I had a jig. I threw a jig around this rock and just, tried to make something happen. And I noticed that the water was a lot more stained than it typically is down here. Typically this is really clear water down by the dam. And as soon as I stopped and saw that, it was like the rest of the lake. I thought, well, I'm probably kind of wasting my time. And I was. I didn't get a bite. Now I'm thinking it's probably about 12 o'clock or maybe 12:30, 12:45. I spent here about 30 minutes and, still do not have a fish. So moving on to the next spot. So at this point, I didn't know what else to do, and I got out the dreaded Alabama rig. And here's a tip for you guys. I know a lot of guys cut the hooks off these things. Don't cut the hooks off till the tournament starts, because if you don't throw it, now you've wasted 2 hooks that you've, cut. But you can only have 3 hooks on it for these Major League Fishing tournaments, so you can see I'm here I'm cutting off my extra 2 hooks and I'm getting ready to throw this thing. For those that don't know what it is, it's basically got 5 baits hanging off of it. It's got some spinners. They call it an umbrella rig, but it's technically, I guess, an Alabama rig because it was born in Alabama. And, you know, I went to a marina and just kind of started slow rolling it around some of these pylons and up underneath these sailboats. And I could see some suspended fish in my Garmin. You can see I'm looking down here at my Garmin, and you can see the fish. They're, you know, in about 8 to 9 foot of water. It's a fairly deep marina, and I'm hoping I can trigger probably, you know, what I believe to be spotted bass and to giving this Alabama rig a bite. I personally was trying to avoid throwing this thing because it's awkward to throw. It's really heavy, and I'd much rather catch them on a single lure than kind of this chandelier type thing. But, you know, I can't prove this, but I suspect a lot of the guys that caught them pretty good in this tournament were throwing Alabama rigs. That's just what I think looking back on it in hindsight. And maybe I should have started this a lot earlier, but I did throw it a little bit in practice, and I didn't get a bite on it either. And so my gut told me this is a really good lure to fish when it's really cold and the fish are suspended. I knew that, but I was going to try to catch them other ways. I really didn't want to use this Alabama rig. But at this point, I'm just, I think it was about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I had a 5 o'clock weigh-in, which was really late. But the day was slipping away from me. I didn't have any fish. I didn't know what else to do. So I got the Alabama rig out and I started chunking it. My shoulders paid a price for it later. But that's where I'm at right now in the tournament. No fish in the boat, probably 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Got the Alabama rig out, and I'm going for broke. And I told myself I was going to throw this thing the rest of the day, and I was either going to zero or hopefully catch a fish or 2 on it.
I got a 3-bedroom, 2-bath brick house with a basement and access to 27 acres. And
Paid $550.
I paid $550 a month.
Good Lord.
Yeah. And the good thing is his kids, they love me to death. They send me texts all the time thanking me for helping look after Graham, because they live in, well, that one guy is retired from the Marines, but he works for the government now, kind of like what you were saying.
Right.
His wife, it's his dad, and so they live up near DC, and they're all the time sending me texts. Appreciate it. I got home one day, I had a $200 gift card on my porch from them. They've been in to visit. I mean, they know I would like to buy it whenever. Graham,
Where does the old man live?
right next door. So he's got a house that's got 2 houses on it. 27 acres.
So at this point, I'm getting pretty desperate. I've been throwing the Alabama rig around, and finally I get a little bit of luck.
It is. This side, left side, this side, this side, this side, this side. I'm gonna show you. Yes, sir. Now that's a spot right there, buddy.
How about that?
Woo! Son.
Shit.
Look at that thing.
Hey, Mom got hung up on the GoPro over here somehow.
Look at that spot, would you?
Dude. Jump. That's what I'm talking about. 8 minutes before 3 o'clock. Right
Took all day, but we got a fish. Huh?
It's a chunky. Shit, yeah. Ain't that something?
So at this point, I'm thinking maybe I can make something work with this Alabama rig. And I committed doubled down on it. I threw it on docks, some points, some offshore humps. I threw it on rocks. My GoPro ran out of storage space. I didn't get to capture all the footage of the tournament, but I put it everywhere I could possibly think of. And I was thinking maybe the next cast, maybe the next cast. And as fishermen, that's really what keeps us going. What's going to happen that next cast? The unknown, the excitement, the mystery of it all. It was a cold tournament. It was a tough tournament. But I am always looking forward to the next cast. And this was pretty much the end of my day. And I am getting ready to take it in to weigh in.
You got enough?
Yeah, it's kind of good, man.
That's a big damn spot, boy.
Good motor.
Yeah. Good fish. 1-1, buddy. Awful happy to have him, I tell you that.
5 ounces. Thank you, Kevin. Next to the scales on the boater side, Otto Heck from Sneed's Ferry. He's got one in his bag for us today. That one's gonna weigh 4 pounds, 10 ounces. Thank you, Otto. Well, good, come to the scales. Looking on the calendar side. We've got 3 fish in this bag for us today.
Hey everyone, wow, what a tournament, right? The coldest tournament that I think I've ever fished. 3 days below freezing for most of the days. Had ice in my rod guides. You know, my fingers were cold, my toes were cold, my face was windburnt. It was really a brutal tournament. And I've got a few good lessons learned for you. I certainly had some great takeaways from this tournament for myself. First one I want to talk to you about is the weather. And the biggest thing I think for the cold is slow down. And really looking back on some of these video clips that I was in this tournament, I think that's one portion that I missed the boat on. I just didn't fish slow enough. I thought I was fishing slow, but I really wasn't. I have a natural tendency to fish fast, and I want to cover water, and I think a lot of fishermen do. But when it's cold like this, you've really got to slow down because those fish are not going to chase your lure. A lot of times you can get away with a cast that might be 6, 7, 8 feet off, and those bass will come after it. When it's cold like this, I don't think they're chasing at all, right? I mean, you've got to throw it right on top of them, and I think that's why a lot of times specific lures work really well in the cold weather, but that's the biggest takeaway is whenever you think you're fishing slow in the cold weather, slow down some more and you'll get some more bites. Second thing I want to talk to you about is cold weather lures. And, you know, the 2 in particular that I relied on in this tournament, although I only got bit on one of them, but I still have confidence that the other one would work had I put it in the right spot, are the Alabama rig and the jig. And yeah, I know jerk baits and a few other lures do really well in the cold weather. I did not use those in this tournament. I threw them some. I didn't get bit. I didn't have a lot of confidence in them. Some guys probably caught them on those baits. Specifically the jerk bait, but I did not. So the Alabama rig. So this is the Shane's, I think, Blades of Glory Alabama rig. You can see it's got blades on it. It's got 5 hooks. And I know what you're thinking. Where's the, okay, Otto, where's the swim baits? These are them right here. So Kitech, they're the swing impacts, the 4 inches. I usually cut them down a little bit for the spotted bass on Norman because their mouths aren't that big and they're kind of small. And I'm sure there's probably some better techniques or secrets out there in the Alabama rig that guys use on Norman. But that's what I used. It seems to work. I've had success with it in the past. The Shane's baits are pretty easy to find, especially around the local Norman area. The second thing I want to talk about is jigs. And this is the jig I use. You can actually still see the line tied on the jig. I usually throw like a green pumpkin or, you know, with a little bit of blue and brown on it. In Norman, the water was stained a little bit more this time, but this is what I throw. I think the head is important. I throw kind of a rounded head, and I like the eyelet to be flat coming out, not sticking up vertical. I think it gives you a little bit better feel, and I think it brings it up over the rocks a little bit better when the eyelet, if you see what I'm talking about, the eyelet is kind of, it's facing towards you instead of vertical. Some jig eyelets will be, instead of flat, they'll be this way. But that's what I use for fishing Norman. It goes over rock really well. I feel like it does. It doesn't hang up as much. And what trailer did I use? That's it, right? The Zoom, you know, salty chunk and green pumpkin. I just thread it right up on the jig, and I usually use some super glue it. And that's about it. And the Zoom chunk, they don't have a lot of actions on the legs, and I think that's important in the cold weather too. And those are the baits that I use. So an Alabama rig and a jig, I think you really can't go wrong on Lake Norman or really any cold weather tournament. The other thing I want to talk to you about is watercolor. Watercolor becomes even more critical in cold water because I talked about earlier, the fish aren't going to chase. So they've got to be able to see your lure. And I think sometimes when you get in that really dirty, brown, cold water, it's just almost impossible to get a bite. I can't think of worse conditions than cold, muddy water. So pay attention to watercolor. Try to find some clear water. Yeah, I mean, when it starts warming up, sometimes that muddy water will get warm and the fish will bite in it. But when it's cold and you've had a cold front, just stay away from that muddy water and look for some decent water color. And the last thing I want to talk to you about in Norman for cold weather is docks, right? Don't underestimate docks in the cold weather. The fish I caught was off a dock. I know some other guys that caught them off docks, and you think, well, they probably will be in other places or deeper water, but it just goes back to what I've always said about Norman. I just think it's a dock lake. And if you do not fish a lot of docks in Norman, if you just ignore that, I think you're really going to struggle. So those are my lessons learned. That's the whiff 'em, right? Slow down in cold weather. Make sure you're using cold weather baits. Alabama rig, jigs are a great place to start. Pay attention to your watercolor, and don't give up on the docks in Norman, no matter how cold it is, because I promise you those fish are going to be on there. So, hey, I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. The next tournament is Smith Mountain Lake in April. I may fish a couple local tournaments in between then if I do, and I'll push out some videos to you guys. But hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching Auto Hake Fishing out here.